Well, hello everyone, Texy88 here and welcome to another review. And now I'm looking at the Amstrad CPC version of The Great Escape. Now I've previously looked at the ZX Spectrum version, and the first thing I notice is that this screen looks worryingly similar to that. It's actually a less colourful version of the border and outside detail as the Spectrum version. So I get the nasty feeling this is going to be a Spectrum port, because with the if you allow for that it's a different typeface and no colour apart from yellow, it's exactly the friggin' same. So we'll do keyboard. The colour of the flag's yellow as well. Oh my goodness, not only is it a Spectrum port, it's slow. Oh, I see them. Oh my goodness, look how slow this is. I mean, if you saw my review of the Spectrum version, it absolutely motors along, but this is pretty much half the speed of that. Not to mention it's a lazy Spectrum port, as I've already said. Oh God. This is one of my favourite games on the Spectrum, and now for the first time I'm getting the chance to experience my favourite game on the Spectrum on a different machine, running at virtually half the speed. Why didn't they just do it from scratch? This is awful. So even when you're even when you're inside and there's hardly anything there, it crawls. Okay. Yes. And now I've got to try and take this back to my hut and stick it in the tunnel that I know is there from the Spectrum version. Hopefully none of the Nazis will see me. I'm hoping not, because I dread to think how long it's going to actually take to do everything, given how slow this is running. Oh no. Go away. Go away. Okay, so how come they're out and about and the flag's red? That doesn't make sense. When the flag's red, you're in an area where you're not supposed to be. And yet those guards completely ignored me, and there are prisoners out and about, and the flag colour being red is suggesting I'm not supposed to be outside. Ugh. Right now it's saying I'm allowed to be outside. Well, that's not the same as in the Spectrum version. Oh my goodness. I mean, look, it's even a tiny room and it's absolutely slowed right down to a crawl. Talking of crawling, look at this. Not sure about the sound effects when you pick up and drop items, though. They sound a bit stupid. I mean, I actually preferred the Spectrum sound effect for that, and that's saying something considering the Spectrum has an inferior sound chip to the Amstrad. Ugh. Don't think I'm going to make it in time for roll call. Especially with the speed this whole shebang is running at. I mean, this is horrendous. It says miss roll call and the bell doesn't even ring. It did in the Spectrum version when that happened. Breakfast time. Get away from me, I'm trying to have brekkie. Look at it. It's jerky scrolling. Get out of my way. Ugh. Oh, dearie me. If you're used to playing the Spectrum version of this, then this version will absolutely reduce you to tears because it's so slow. I mean, honestly, look at this. There's barely anything happening. And because of that, this blooming breakfast time's probably going to take an eternity. The keyboard controls seem to be the standard QAOP, although they've got M for the fire button instead of space. As in the Spectrum version, to pick something up, you press up and fire. To drop it, press down and fire. And to use an item, you press left and fire for the leftmost item in your inventory, and right and fire for the rightmost item in your inventory. Gosh, this is horrendous. I don't know if I can actually be asked to wait for the other people to come into this room. I mean, they were just outside. What's keeping them? Oh, here we go. Look at that. Yet another case of CPC owners being lumbered with a half-speed Spectrum port. They've done absolutely nothing to the graphics apart from remove almost all of the colour from the outer decoration pieces. All the colour that was on those medals in the bottom right corner and on the grass and the flagpole and the bell, completely gone in this. It's all just yellow. So this is actually less colourful than the Spectrum version upon which it's based. Could they really not have done this whole thing from scratch and actually made better use of the CPC's capabilities? I mean, this is just so turgidly paced. I mean, never mind breakfast time. By the time it's over, it'd probably be time for bed in real life. Oh boy, come on. How long does it take to eat a bowl full of chow? Not that prisoners here actually eat anything, because as in the Spectrum version upon which this is based, there's actually nothing on the table in front of them. And now the bell isn't even going off to show that it's no longer breakfast time. I mean, whoever was responsible for doing this version needs to have Biff Tannen repeatedly rap his knuckles on their head and ask them if anyone was actually home. Goodness me, this is horrific. I think I'm going to take control here because otherwise I'll get bored out of my skull. I'm not going to do as much of a playthrough as I did on the Spectrum version when I was reviewing that, because this is just painful. No. That bell sound is atrocious. I mean, even on the Spectrum version with its limited sound capabilities, it sounded more like a bell than that bell sound does. Oh my goodness me. I've just let the computer take control, so I'm worried if I go in there again that those guards will be just outside the door and that my prisoner character will get arrested. Although, given the speed this runs at, that would be a darn sight more interesting than waiting around for it to come up with exercise time, and it probably won't even ring a bell. This is absolutely shameful, and I just can't believe that they thought that this was a releasable product. But release it they did at inevitably at a higher price than that of the Spectrum version, and they effectively got a Spectrum version that sounds worse, looks worse, and plays about half the speed of the actual Spectrum version. Right, I think the guards are outside that area now, so hopefully get out of my way. Get out of my way. I mean, look. Jerk, 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 jerk. It's horrific. And because it's so much slower, it's harder to line myself up. Right. Oh, it did give a bell sound. That's something. Oh my goodness, this is so slow. I mean, look, even the speed at which it redraws the next screen is slow. Actually, I'm going to leave the key outside that room. Oh, dearie me. I can't believe even in titchy rooms like this, it's crawling. If you do intend to play this on an emulator, and if your emulator's got the capability, I'd strongly recommend that you actually boost the speed of it if it has such an option to make the game a bit more playable than it actually is, because this is just absolutely painstakingly horrible. Right, so there's the Nazi uniform. Now I look just like the other guards, and the only one I have to really worry about when I'm like this is the commandant, and I must be careful not to actually drop any objects or pick them up in the presence of any of the other guards, because otherwise they all know I'm a prisoner in disguise. In disguise what? In disguise underpants, probably. Okay, maybe not. Sorry, I'm just trying to cheer myself up so I don't fall asleep playing this desperately slow version of one of my favourite retro games. Oh dear. This needs a substantial speed boost. I mean, what it really needs is to have been reprogrammed properly and making better use of the Amstrad's capabilities, because this is exceptionally disappointing. And it's less colourful than the Spectrum version. What's that all about? I mean, it's not like the Amstrad CPC has to worry about the attribute problem that the Spectrum version does, and yet the Spectrum version has more colour. Not on the main screen, obviously, because that would never have worked, but certainly on the flag and the objects in your inventory, and on the bell, and on those medals in the bottom right corner. But I've been playing for nearly a quarter of an hour, and compared to the Spectrum version, I've barely done anything. I just can't get over how obnoxious this is. One of the most suspenseful retro games ever. One of the best isometric arcaded adventure style games ever, and it's just been butchered mercilessly. God, look at this! Look how slow those dogs are going. I mean, honest to God, a sloth could crawl faster than this. There's virtually no sound. I mean, could you imagine if there were bursts of Elmer Bernstein's score every time he did something significant? Instead, you get almost deathly silence. I mean, on the Spectrum 48K, that was excusable because its sound capabilities were very limited and had less memory, but when it's a CPC with the capability to do nice, vibrantly coloured graphics, albeit some quite often a bit blocky, there's just no excuse. I mean, what was going through their minds when they thought it was a good idea to do a Spectrum port? Especially to not even do anything to make sure that it kept the speed up. I mean, it's not like it's even a big playing area. I mean, it's no. I don't think it's any smaller than the playing area of the original Spectrum version, but this is still absolutely crawling. Oh my goodness me! This is utterly hideous. I wonder what the screenshots on the back of the original box looked like for versions other than the Spectrum version. Did they even show them at all from the versions other than the Spectrum version? Because I get the feeling that if they were to show graphics from this version, I have the sneaky suspicion that it wouldn't have done very well at all, because these graphics are fine on the Spectrum, but on the CPC they are a joke. Not because they're badly drawn or anything like that, but because people who are used to the CPC knows that it's capable of doing lots of different coloured graphics, and on that front, this version just doesn't deliver because they copped out and did a lazy Spectrum port. And I'm not going to play for this for much longer because this is just languid. I mean, look at that, it's so jerky. Oh, goodness me. Oh, dearie me. Hey, where did he come from? He just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. My goodness. This is absolutely preposterous. See, even that red is the same colour as in the Spectrum version. Oh, goodness me. Or as you probably guessed, because it's a Spectrum port, you don't have to worry about anything being in different places, because apart from the speed and the lack of colour on the outer decoration, it's basically the same game. With some pretty disagreeable sound effects. And a speed that would make you feel comatose before too long. Oh my goodness, I've been playing for 20 odd minutes now, and I mean, it's only just coming to the close of game day. This is horrendous. I mean, can you imagine if someone was actually on an Amstrad CPC playing this, and a kid had come home from school, done all their homework, put this on, and wanted to complete the game before they either had to be called to the dinner table for their evening meal or had to go to bed? Did they ever stand a realistic chance of being able to finish it? I mean, everything just takes so long because it's so slow. And it's so disappointing though, because were it not for the slowness, this would be this is such a classic. But not this version, obviously, because it stinks. I tell you what, I think I'm going to wind up this review. I think if you've seen my Spectrum version, you know exactly how this pans out, because it's essentially the same game. So I'm going to actually leave this review there, because I can't be bothered to play anymore. This is just boring. So I'm just going to get myself outside and let the CPU take control while I discuss the final verdict. And this is not, absolutely not, going to get anything like as good a score as the Spectrum version. Graphics. Lazy Spectrum port. They look exactly the same as the graphics on the Spectrum version, because they are the same as the graphics on the Spectrum version. It's just that the outer decoration, which is not part of the in-game view, has been completely shorn of all of the colour that was in the Spectrum original, despite the fact that CPC doesn't have to worry about attribute clash. The animation is the same, but slower. So basically the graphics are disappointing because they've been ported directly from the Spectrum and shorn of the other outer edges details that color wise that made it look visually interesting. Sound, questionable. I mean, the sound when you pick up and drop items it's not that great, really. I mean, just the little bleep that was in the Spectrum version, that was quite sufficient. And the sound of the bell is it's just drab, and it doesn't even sound like a bell. As I said earlier, even the bell sound that's used in the Spectrum version sounds more like an actual bell in real life than this piece of crap. God, I bet that guy's tired after having to sludge along the way. That's just gameplay. Well, it would play exactly the same as the Spectrum version, but it's just so slow. I'd say this is possibly even less than half the speed of the Spectrum original upon which this version is based. That is absolutely unforgivable, and it makes the game it makes a classic game an unutterable bore. So I'm going to give the CPC version of The Great Escape 3 out of 10. A massive disappointment. Could have been good, but it's a Spectrum port and it's just way too slow, and therefore an utter bore to play. So hope you enjoyed that review. Sorry it went on for so long, but given the speed at which this game runs, it was somewhat inevitable. Texie88 out.